Welcome to the world behind midnight. Tonight, we uncover something that should have stayed buried. If you're hearing this, it's already too late. My name is Marcus Brennan, 35 years old, from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My entire life, I've hunted through bayous and pine forests across the deep south. I've tracked deer through thickets so dense you couldn't see 5 feet ahead. I've sat in tree stands during hurricanes just to prove I could handle it. I don't believe in ghosts or urban legends or any of that cryptid nonsense you see on late-night television shows. I believe in what I can see and touch. But what happened to me near Pine Hollow last October changed how I see the world forever. Changed how I view the darkness beyond my headlights at night. My wife Rachel and I had rented an RV for a quiet weekend in Kasichi National Forest. It was mid-October 2023. That perfect window when Louisiana finally cools down. The mosquitoes thin out enough to make camping bearable. We'd been planning this trip for months, both of us desperate to escape the noise and constant stress of city life. Rachel worked as a nurse, pulling 12-hour shifts that left her exhausted and emotionally drained. I managed a sporting goods store, dealing with demanding customers and impossible corporate inventory quotas. We needed this escape. Needed the silence, and the stars and each other, without the constant buzz of civilization pressing down on us like a physical weight. We'd found an isolated spot, 3 miles off the main road, accessible only by a gravel track that wound through stands of longleaf pine and scrub oak. The clearing was perfect, maybe 50 yards across, ringed by trees that had been growing since before my grandparents were born. Ancient giants watching over this small space. The ground was flat and covered in a thick carpet of pine needles that crunched under our feet. The smell was incredible, like Christmas and pure wilderness mixed together. We'd backed the RV in near the tree line, giving us a clear view of the clearing and the fire pit someone had built from creek stones years ago. The first evening passed like something out of a camping magazine, the kind of experience you see in advertisements and think can't possibly be real, but somehow was. We'd built a fire using deadfall wood I'd gathered from the forest edge. We watched the flames dance and pop while the sun set through the branches in impossible colors. Orange and purple and red painted the sky like someone had taken a brush to the clouds. We grilled sausages that tasted better than anything we'd eaten in months. Drank beer that went down smooth and easy. Talked about nothing and everything, while the stars began to appear overhead like pinpricks in black fabric, letting heaven shine through. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, like someone had spilled milk across black velvet. You can't see stars like that in the city, where light pollution washes everything out. Out here, they were so bright and numerous they cast actual shadows on the ground. You could read by starlight alone, if you had good enough eyes. Around midnight we turned in, exhausted from the 5-hour drive and the physical work of setting up camp. Every muscle in my body felt pleasantly tired and heavy. The RV smelled of pine and wood smoke and that particular scent of canvas and propane that defines camping. It's a smell that always makes me feel like a kid again. Rachel fell asleep almost immediately, her breathing evening out into the gentle rhythm I'd known for 8 years of marriage. The sound was comforting, familiar, safe in the darkness. I lay there a while longer, listening to the night sounds through the thin walls, crickets chirping in waves, the occasional hoot of an owl somewhere deep in the forest, wind moving through the pine branches with a sound like distant ocean waves. Eventually, I drifted off too, sinking into the kind of deep sleep you only get when completely relaxed. Everything changed around 3 in the morning. Rachel shook my shoulder with an urgency that jolted me instantly awake. My heart was already hammering before my conscious mind had fully engaged. Her hand was trembling against my arm, her breathing shallow and rapid, like she'd just finished running a marathon. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice tight with raw fear. "Something's outside." I heard it walking around the RV. Her whole body was shaking where she pressed against me, and I could feel the terror radiating from her skin. I was groggy, still half trapped in whatever dream I'd been having, my thoughts moving through molasses. My first instinct was to dismiss her concern as camping anxiety amplified by darkness. My first thought was raccoons, maybe an armadillo rooting through our trash. We'd secured everything before bed, but animals are persistent and clever when they smell food. "What did you hear?" I mumbled, rubbing my eyes and trying to force my brain into something resembling alertness. The words came out slurred and thick with sleep. "Heavy footsteps," she said, her voice barely audible, like she was afraid whatever was outside might hear us talking about it. Not like an animal scurrying or scratching around, like someone walking on two legs, slow and deliberate, taking their time. It circled the whole RV, Marcus. I heard it stop at every window, like it was methodically checking each one. My stomach tightened at her words. The idea of someone prowling around our campsite in the dead of night sent a spike of adrenaline through my system that burned away sleep. We were 3 miles from the nearest road, and probably 10 miles from the nearest other human being. If someone was out there with bad intentions, we were completely vulnerable and isolated. I slipped out of bed as quietly as possible, my bare feet touching the cold linoleum floor. I reached for my Ruger 357 from the lockbox under the driver's seat. My hands found it by memory, muscle memory from hundreds of range sessions. I kept it loaded with hollow points, specifically for situations like this, though I'd never imagined actually needing it. Rachel stayed in bed, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide and fixed on the window beside her. I could see her reflection in the glass, pale and frightened. Her face looked ghostly in the dim ambient light that filtered through the curtains. She looked smaller than usual, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen from my normally fearless wife. The RV was silent except for our breathing and the faint creak of the frame settling. Small pops and groans as metal and fiberglass adjusted to the cooling night air. I moved toward the side window, the one facing the tree line, placing each foot carefully to avoid making noise. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it. I carefully pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside, maybe an inch of gap. I tried not to silhouette myself against any interior light that might give away my position. Moonlight filtered through the branches, casting long shadows across the clearing that seemed to move and shift even as I watched. Everything looked still and peaceful on the surface. The fire pit was dark, just a faint red glow from buried coals that would stay warm until morning. The trees stood like silent sentinels guarding the perimeter of our small space. No movement, no shapes that didn't belong. Just trees and shadows, and the silver wash of moonlight painting everything in shades of gray and black and deep blue. "Maybe it was just a deer," I said quietly, trying to convince myself as much as her. "They can sound heavier than you'd think, especially on gravel when they're nervous." Rachel shook her head slowly, emphatically. "That wasn't a deer, Marcus. Whatever it was stood upright on 2 legs. I heard it breathing, this deep, wet sound, like something struggling for air. Like it had just been running hard, or had something wrong with its lungs. It wasn't natural. It wasn't right." Her voice was shaking now, barely holding together under the weight of fear. I checked every window, moving methodically from front to back. I swept my gaze across every angle, looking for anything out of place. Nothing, just trees and shadows and moonlight. My heart rate was starting to settle when Rachel gasped sharply behind me. "There," she pointed at the window near the kitchenette with a trembling finger. "I saw something move just now." I crossed to her side in 2 quick steps, weapon raised and finger resting along the frame above the trigger. At first, I didn't see anything beyond the usual forest darkness. Then, slowly, a shape detached itself from the darkness beyond the glass. It was tall, easily 7 feet, standing just at the edge of where the moonlight reached the trees. The silhouette was wrong, all wrong in ways my brain struggled to process. Broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, like an Olympic swimmer's build, but impossibly exaggerated and distorted. Arms that hung too low, reaching almost to the knees, ending in hands that seemed oversized even from this distance. The proportions were all off. like someone had stretched a human body. "What the hell is that?" Rachel whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer that made any sense whatsoever. My brain was trying to categorize what I was seeing, running through possibilities like a computer database. Bear, person in a costume, trick of the light and shadows. Nothing fit properly. The figure swayed slightly, rocking on its heels with a motion that seemed almost contemplative. I realized with growing horror that it was watching us, studying us with clear intent. Not just looking in our direction randomly, but watching with intelligence and purpose, making decisions about us. The thought sent ice water through my veins and made my hands slippery with sweat. Then it moved closer. 3 steps, slow and measured and deliberate, bringing it into a shaft of moonlight that fell between the trees like a spotlight on a stage. That's when I saw the head clearly for the first time. My mind recoiled from what my eyes were showing me. Elongated like a wolf's, but broader through the jaw and skull. Pointed ears sat high on the skull, swiveling independently like a dog's, tracking every tiny sound. The muzzle was long and dark, possibly black, covered in short fur that glistened wetly. When it opened its mouth slightly, I saw teeth, rows of them, long and sharp and white, catching the light like broken glass or polished bone. Too many teeth, too large. She took a shaky breath, steadying herself against the counter. "I swear it looked like something from a nightmare," she whispered. "Like a werewolf from the movies, but real and solid." The creature's head snapped toward, the sound of her voice, ears forward and alert. For the first time I saw its eyes clearly, and wished I hadn't seen them at all. They reflected the moonlight with an amber glow, not like the green shine of a deer or the white flash of a raccoon. These were different, deliberate, focused with unmistakable intelligence. The eyes looked almost human in their expressiveness, but utterly inhuman in everything else. They held awareness and calculation, and something that might have been curiosity or might have been hunger. I couldn't tell which. I backed away from the window slowly, pulling Rachel with me. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely keep the gun steady and pointed in a safe direction. "That's not real," Rachel whispered, like saying the words would somehow make them true. "That can't be real," but it was. It was standing 20 feet from our RV, solid and massive and impossible, breaking every rule of biology and zoology I'd ever learned. Existing anyway, despite everything science said about what could and couldn't be real in these forests. The creature circled again, this time slower and more deliberate. I tracked its movement by sound alone, since I couldn't see it anymore from our position away from the windows. Heavy footfalls in the gravel, each step distinct and purposeful. The scrape of something against the RV's metal siding, claws or rough fur dragging across the surface with a sound like sandpaper. The wet breathing that Rachel had described, long deep inhalations like it was tasting our scent, learning us, memorizing our smell for future reference. The thought made my skin crawl with revulsion and primal fear. It stopped at the door. I heard it sniffing, long deep breaths being pulled through that massive nose. Like a bloodhound, but deeper, more resonant, more deliberate in its investigation. My finger tightened on the trigger unconsciously. If it tried to get in, I'd shoot. I'd empty the damn cylinder if I had to, and reload and empty it again. But part of me, the rational part that was quickly losing ground to primal fear, wondered if bullets would even stop something like that. Would hollow points be enough against that mass? Minutes crawled past like hours. The creature remained at the door, breathing, waiting, doing something I couldn't understand with its inhuman mind. 30 seconds felt like 30 minutes in the suffocating silence. Then, without warning or any indication of why, it moved away. I heard it retreat toward the tree line, the footsteps fading into silence that felt somehow worse than the presence. We waited, neither of us moving, barely breathing. 5 minutes past 10. Nothing but the normal sounds of the forest slowly returning like the world was waking up from a nightmare. "I'm going out there," I said finally, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Rachel grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks. Are you insane? You absolutely cannot go out there. I have to, I said, gently removing her hand. I need to see what that was. Need to know if it left tracks or any evidence that what we saw was real. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had, but I couldn't just sit there wondering. Couldn't spend the rest of my life questioning my own sanity and perception. I unlocked the door and eased it open slowly, gun leading the way. The night air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine needles and something else, something musky. I stepped down onto the gravel, every sense heightened to an almost painful degree. The clearing was empty. The fire had burned down too, glowing embers, casting barely any useful light. I moved around the RV slowly, checking the ground with my flashlight. Near the door, pressed deep into the soft earth beside the gravel, I found them, prints that made my blood freeze. Large ones, easily 12 inches long and proportionally wide. They had 5 toes, each ending in a distinct claw mark that had sunk into the soil like spikes being driven in. The heel impression was elongated, showing the creature had been standing upright with weight distributed like a human's. But these weren't human prints. The proportions were completely wrong and disturbing. The toe spread was too wide, the claw marks too deep and too long. Whatever made these weighed at least 300 pounds, maybe significantly more, given how deep they sank. The stride was long and confident, showing no hesitation. This thing had walked right up to our door without any fear or caution whatsoever, like it owned this forest and we were intruders. I followed the tracks to the tree line, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. They disappeared into the underbrush, but not before I noticed something that made my blood run cold with new terror. About 30 yards into the trees, there was a large oak with deep gouges carved into the bark. 4 parallel lines running vertically for about 3 feet up the trunk. They were fresh and deep, sap still weeping from the wounds like blood from cuts. The wood underneath was exposed and pale. Whatever had made these marks had done it recently, maybe while we slept, or just before Rachel woke. Marcus, Rachel's voice called from the RV door, tight with renewed fear. Please, come back inside right now. I took one last look at the woods, at the darkness between the trees, where anything could hide. I hurried back, locked the door behind me, and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. My hands were still shaking as I checked the lock 3 times. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. We sat together on the bed, every light in the RV, blazing gun in my lap, jumping at every sound that came from outside. Wind through the trees became footsteps in my paranoid mind. Branches scraping the roof became claws testing for weak points. The night stretched endlessly, each minute feeling like an hour of torture. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky pale gray through the windows, we packed up in record time. We didn't speak much, just moved with urgent efficiency, born of pure terror. Rachel kept glancing at the tree line while I hitched everything up with fumbling hands. I could feel eyes on us, that prickling sensation of being watched from the shadows. But every time I looked toward the forest, there was nothing there. Just trees and morning mist and birds starting their dawn chorus like nothing unusual had happened at all. We were on the road within 30 minutes. As we drove away, I checked the rearview mirror one last time. Standing at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in morning mist, was a shape. Tall and dark and unmistakable. It didn't move, didn't follow, didn't react. It just watched us leave, with what might have been satisfaction, or might have been patience. I pressed harder on the accelerator. 4 weeks afterward, I tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was a bear with mange walking upright. Maybe someone in an elaborate costume playing a cruel prank on campers. Maybe the fear and darkness had distorted what we'd actually witnessed, made something ordinary seem extraordinary. But the prints told a different story. The gouges in that tree told a different story too. I started researching obsessively, late nights on obscure forums and websites dedicated to cryptid sightings. reading encounter reports from across the country with growing recognition and dread. That's when I first encountered the term Dogman. Witnesses across the country, particularly in forested areas of the South and Midwest, describing encounters with creatures that matched what we'd seen exactly. Bipedal canines, 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in fur, with wolf-like heads and intelligent eyes, moving with purpose and apparent intelligence, leaving tracks that defied conventional zoology and biology. Some said they were related to werewolves from European folklore. Others claimed they were a separate species, evolved in parallel to humans, hiding in deep wilderness areas where humans rarely ventured. A few suggested they were something else entirely, something that defied classification and comfortable categories, something that existed in the gaps of human knowledge. I didn't know what to believe anymore, but I knew what I'd seen was real, knew those prints were real, knew the terror I'd felt was the most genuine emotion I'd ever experienced in my entire life. Rachel doesn't talk about that night anymore. She's made me promise we'll never go camping in isolated areas again. She has nightmares sometimes, wakes up in cold sweat, gasping for air, convinced she hears something breathing outside our bedroom window. I check every time, gun in hand, but there's never anything there. Just suburban darkness and familiar street sounds. I haven't been back to Pine Hollow. Part of me wants to find proof, to validate what we experienced, and prove I'm not losing my mind or my grip on reality. But a bigger part of me, the part that felt those amber eyes watching from the darkness, knows better. Some things aren't meant to be found or proven or documented for science. Some things live in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, in the darkness that exists at the edge of campfire light and human understanding. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and Rachel is asleep beside me, I stand at our bedroom window and look out at the tree line behind our property. The oaks and pines sway in the breeze, shadows shifting and dancing in ways that could be wind or could be something else. And I wonder if somewhere out there, creatures still walk, still watch with intelligent eyes from forest shadows, still wait for humans to wander too far from safety, still remember the scent of everyone who's ever seen them and survived to tell about it. If you've made it this far, you felt it too. That primal fear that lives in all of us, buried under civilization, but never truly gone. Subscribe to The World Behind Midnight, and remember something important. Some things in the dark are watching back. Don't let them see you alone.